Good evening and a warm welcome on behalf of the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, the International Institute for Peace and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation to this panel discussion on the new Black Sea. My name is Stefan Malerius. I'm the director of the regional program of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for the South Caucasus. For thousands of years, the Black Sea has been a place of meetings and exchanges. It has often been a natural border between empires. And now it is again a place where East and West meet on open terrain. Seen as a Soviet lake for decades, the Black Sea has gradually become a European lake. The spectrum of interests involving the Black Sea is very diverse, ranging from security, high-tech weapons, connectivity, transcontinental energy networks, finances and industrial capacities. But maybe even more important, the Black Sea coastal states are concerned on issues of identity and values. We had today in the morning and the afternoon 3 very intense workshops on the Black Sea where we looked at the gatekeeper of the Black Sea and discussed strategies and considerations of Turkey. And we paid attention to the wider Black Sea region, which is the South Caucasus, and discussed current politics of the 3 states concerned. And eventually we discussed the economic consequences of the war in Ukraine for the Black Sea region and beyond. We agreed that no one can predict the outcomes of Russia's war against Ukraine. And at the same time, we agreed that at the end of this war, the Black Sea will be a different region. And there will be different constellations, configurations, and a totally new situation. Therefore, for the final panel to discuss or to speak about the new Black Sea seems to be very appropriate. Before we listen to our panelists, I think we will have the opportunity to watch a brief clip, and Marilia will tell us more about the clip.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Marilia Guscha. I work at the International Institute for Peace, and I would like to also welcome you here at this event on behalf of my institute, and also thank our cooperation partners at this event that include Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, but as well the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna and the city of Vienna, very importantly. So, as Stefan already mentioned, we had a whole day of expert discussions, and we'll have another one here tonight. But when preparing this conference, we thought that we should also include in it some young voices and young perspectives of people who come from the region, who live there, who have a stake in their country's development. And this is what the video is going to be about. We really tried to reach out to young people in all countries. We weren't successful everywhere, but nevertheless, I think it will provide a very good overview of issues and be a good introduction for the panel that will follow. So I wish you a pleasant evening and fruitful discussions. Thank you very much.
In In the context of the conference, The New Black Sea, How the War in Ukraine is Reshaping the Region, the IIP asked the young people from the Black Sea region to share their views about their country's challenges in regard human rights protection, political and economic conditions. This is what they said.
So, if talk about the biggest problem for Ukraine for now, I think the first one is the lack of ammunition, lack of heavy weapon and air protection. Because my people already showed that we can find and took back our territories, but we really need more support in terms of equipment and protection. The second biggest problem for my country, I think it's infrastructure problem, as we don't know how massively will Russia attack our cities and our facilities, because for example now a lot of cities in my country lived without heating, without water, without even energy, because Russia now focused on to attack with missiles our infrastructure. So in a long way around, it can be a really big problem.
So among human rights violations, there is the problem with LGBTQI community, and there is the problem starts with the fact that in criminal code there is nothing that indicates to aggravating circumstances in case of hate crimes. So basically, this is the first primary reason why the discrimination and human rights violations on this regard don't get underreported and basically cannot be helped to the fullest, and NGOs and civil societies yet are not fully capable of fulfilling this role.
I think as any inhabitant of Moldova, the first problem that comes to mind is poverty. Poverty is widespread. It stems from the limited workplaces. It's also represented by low income, by inequality that stems from these financial differences. And as a result of this widespread poverty is the immigration, especially of the young people, toward the European Union, toward Russia, also toward the USA. Which leaves the country with even less potential for development. And in many ways, that was my story as well, because I immigrated from a young age. So there are many people that still feel connected to the country. They travel back. They are trying to maybe to bring something back, but unfortunately, not many possibilities are offered.
A bit difficult to say the solutions, but I think that the biggest change that I have seen in my field is the development of the education system and the more democratization of the civil society, which is my field of research. I said civil society must be professionalist, election awareness must be created in citizens, and this must be done universities, lecturers, and of course the civil society.
But I believe that generally Romania should reinforce, and it is already reinforcing its commitment to the EU, to NATO, and to its strategic alliance with the US, which are actually the three main pillars of Romania's foreign affairs policy. And I really think that collaborating with the EU partners, NATO partners, with the US on developing different agendas for different areas, starting with healthcare, education, economic matters, more collaboration would actually lead to better results and better integration and fighting back against this all kind of difficulties that we are currently facing.
The issue of human rights also one of the main direction of relations between European Union and Azerbaijan. For this reason, I believe that European Union's more principled position can help for improving human rights and democracy in Azerbaijan. You know that and other foreign organization cannot work in Azerbaijan right now because of legislation and other problems. That's why I think European Union can demand Azerbaijan governments that make more democratic atmosphere for civil society, political party, activists, and others.
The role of the EU is very essential in this process because still the authority of the EU in Georgia is very high, and joining the European Union remains the priority, key priority for our foreign policy. So the EU has to, of course, continue its support towards the Georgian society in terms of programs and also in terms of supporting the civil society organizations in Georgia that are working towards creating a more resilient society, a more democratic society.
There is a huge migration to Caucasus and former USSR regions from Ukraine and Russia and also Belarus. So there is about 100 and 150,000, if I'm not mistaken, migrated people from these regions. And, you know, the country, the economy is getting a boost because of it. But from the other hand, it's becoming... So I don't think any country would have the plan of understanding how to have so many migrants and to have them in their everyday life, just if nothing has happened. So there are some struggles in these terms, and the prices are getting higher, and the people, like the usual citizens, are complaining about this, which is very understandable.
So the increase in the gas price is an extremely important issue for the country, because whereas it's something that Western countries can still deal with, in Moldova it's almost impossible for the population to keep up with the rising prices. There have already been some protests in the country, which I think will also pressure the government to try to negotiate the price with Russia, with Gazprom, because it's a burden that cannot be carried by the population. So I think that there the situation is somehow different from the price increase in Europe. It's more sharp.
For sure, it has always been like this. I was born in 19th, and the Black Sea region, Black Sea, it was the most popular place for vacation. It was the biggest hub for logistics with our countries, with import of our production, and we still think that we are part of Black Sea region, despite of current situations that two of our regions occupied by Russia. We will never accept this. So yes, for sure, we was always related to this.
Absolutely not, because the only connection of Armenia with the Black Sea region is the Armenia's connection with Georgia and through Georgia. Basically, the close border with Turkey and the Turkey's important role in that region, and total blockade between Armenia and Turkey make it impossible for Armenia to be anyhow involved in Black Sea region. And no transportation, communications, trading, nothing basically. So the only connection I see is Georgia, but I don't believe that Armenia right now. Armenia has potential to be involved in Black Sea region, and I hope that in future we are able to create certain agreements and unions that would facilitate Armenia's integration to Black Sea region, because I believe that there is a lot of potential there.
Yes, I would say so. I think, clear that Romania has been really advancing its position in support of more collaboration in the region. I think also the well-known case of Romania against Ukraine on the topic of the Snake Island in 2014, I believe it was, also shown that Romania has strategic interest in the Black Sea region. So it's something that has been on top of the priorities of the foreign affairs bodies and representatives in the past 10, 15 years, especially. Also Mircea Joana, which is the Romanian current deputy secretary in NATO, he's been constantly reaffirming Romania's position and perspectives on the Black Sea region. And there are a lot of think tanks and associations and policy contributions regarding the Black Sea and Romania in the past 5 years. I would say it really flourished as a field of interest. And something else that I would mention here would be also maybe the link to the 3C initiatives. So besides the Black Sea, also how Romania can involve in more collaborative efforts with the Baltic and Adriatic Sea as well, as part of the initiative to strengthen collaboration, basically cutting through from Northern to Southern Europe.
I definitely think that Georgia is one of the most involved countries of the Black Sea region. In addition to the fact that Georgia directly borders the Black Sea, I think the Black Sea has been a very important way for Georgia to be connected to Europe for over centuries.
Good evening from my side. I will moderate this discussion. We invited some of our guests from the seminar, the conference, which was held under Chatham House rule here now for the public debate, but I'm very glad to see also other colleagues here from Armenia, from Moldova, from Ukraine, who may also intervene if they like to contribute to the discussion. We just saw some clip about younger generation voices. They spoke about the war, they spoke about human rights, they spoke about poverty. So all the subjects which we deal with are also on the mind of the younger generation. The real question is there a new Black Sea region evolving? How can it evolve? Can this new Black Sea region be, as one of the young ladies said, be the connection to Europe? What about the role of Russia in this Black Sea region, which is an aggressor in the war with Ukraine, but Russia, if you have a look at the map, is still here and will still be here for the future. So how can we, from a European perspective, look into this neighboring region, and it is an adjacent region to Europe, as also the young lady from Romania correctly underlined. How can we think about the Black Sea region as a new region of prosperity, of peace, and human rights? Well, that's a bit too much perhaps to discuss it in 1 hour, but we'll try at least to give some ideas. I will present the speakers in the order they will speak. The first is Vasyl Filipchuk. He is coming from Kyiv, from Ukraine, and for many years already he's dealing with the domestic situation, analyzing the development inside the country, but especially analyzing the situation of Ukraine in the environment. And of course, unfortunately, with this dreadful war, his analysis and contribution has been even more up-to-date and urgent. And he always was somebody who was interested in peaceful development, but as he told me today, he didn't believe even on the morning or at the evening before the Russian aggression that Russia would act in this aggressive way and occupy the country and try to inhale the country into Russia. But maybe, and we want to have a quite brief discussion for everybody, so please try to be short. How do you see the situation today, and what could be the development in the direction of a peaceful region at the Black Sea? Is there any chance viewing this war, or is the chance for peace and prosperity in the region a lost case? Please.
Thank you, Hannes. Great pleasure to be here with you in the Diplomatic Academy. Very good question. Why I never believed this war would happen, because I'm a former diplomat. I spent almost 2 decades in Ukraine for foreign service, and last 10 years I have been one of experts of Ukrainian think tank, and also I was teaching preventive and peacemaking diplomacy at Ukraine's Diplomatic Academy. So what you do if you teach students about conflicts, how they start, how they evolve, how they settle, you just show them cost-benefit analysis. I presume majority of you know very well what is that. What you gain, what you invest, what kind of military, economic, political power you put in one or another action, and what is the result. So any cost-benefit analysis could not but bring us to conclusion. It is insane for Russia to attack Ukraine. It has nothing but bad consequences. First of all, for Russia, to attack Ukraine with fully-fledged war concept in 2022 was absolutely ridiculous in all types of thinking. I would understand, not as Ukrainian, but as an expert in conflict settlement, if they attacked like that in 2013, 2014, at the end of Maidan. They had narrative, Yanukovych was still legal president, they had army which was morally unable, incapable, unprepared to fight with Russians. So I would, cost-benefit analysis would be different in 2013, 14, even 15. But after 6-7 years of war, when you had 300,000 soldiers who were fighting in Donbass with all this horror of small-scale war, of higher or lower level of intensity, with army psychologically prepared to fight, to attack Ukraine, it was really insane. But Putin did it. I think future students of any academy will spend hours studying explanations why he did it. Was he misinformed? Was he cheated? Was he really ill with his geostrategic ambitions? Was he really misled by Siberian shamans who are believed to advise him on political decisions? Explanations will be different, but now it doesn't matter. No single explanation can be a justification of what he has done. This war has no justification. It's crime. So now when I'm asked quite often to give some briefings and answer the question which you actually asked, it's quite difficult. Any, let's say, student of Diplomatic Academy could imagine win-win or, let's say, not lose-lose situation in case of conflict 2014, 15, 17. After 2402, things changed dramatically. And Russian decision to officially annex and include into its constitution annexation of 4 Ukrainian oblasts last month is point of no return. I cannot find any win-win or at least not lose-lose way out of the situation. So it leads us to a very clear conclusion. It's going to be quite quite a dramatic winter, spring, and who knows how many winters, springs, summers, and autumns we will have to live through before we have end of this story. What is already clear? We have Ukraine's victory. The fact that Ukraine is there and Russia has not occupied our capital and territories according to their initial ambitions, it's already a big victory. But the question how this war will end, there are many scenarios. I made first presentation about possible scenarios in April when well-known negotiations failed. I made 7 scenarios, and every time I was presenting them to my audience, I was always starting from bad scenarios, going to basic, and then to most optimistic. And what I have noticed, after you present best scenarios, they lose any interest in basic or good scenarios. They only want to talk about bad scenarios, so bad they are. So I will just quickly go through scenarios from better to worse to keep you more optimistic. And then these scenarios will define how war in Ukraine will reshape the whole Black Sea region. It will influence in different direction of development of Black Sea region. First of all, it will be democracy or authoritarian regime. It will be liberal values or Russian type of Ruski Mir conservative political regimes. Will it be rule of law and international order, or it will be Westphalian, or I don't know what kind of examples we have to take, rule of army and power. So positive scenario can be different. The easiest and the best would be Russian internal regime change. There is already enough negative perception inside of Russia towards this war. Don't believe Russian official surveys. I've seen many data that 9 out of 10 Russians refuse to give answers when they are asked questions during social surveys. So whatever you see that 60% of Russians support Putin, it's always fake. We see that there is a higher and higher level of discontent, and the best for all of us settlement would be if tomorrow, I don't know, coup d'etat, agreement of oligarchs, Siloviki deciding to throw away Putin, it would settle the problem, I think, automatically, because it would lead to card house of Putin power fall down. It would lead to disorder in Russian army and all the other groups with which we are fighting, and it will be just issue of days to take over everything. It would immediately mean victory for democracy, for European integration. It would mean victory for liberal values for all of the region. Other positive scenario is if Ukraine takes back its territory militarily. It's not so easy. Of course, we have seen great victories of our army in Kharkiv and Kherson, and we believe our army can do. However, there are some difficult questions which we as specialists cannot ignore. The question is, of course, yes, we can compare Putin to Hitler. There's just one difference between Putin and Hitler. Hitler didn't have nuclear weapons. If Hitler had nuclear weapon in 1945, I have a question how we would have end of Second World War. Now, to imagine that without neutralizing nuclear threat from Hitler, from Putin, and our army getting to Crimea, well, there are some legitimate questions we have to answer to this. What will be our strategy to remove this? But military success is possible. It's one of key options. I would say basic scenario which we hope to be implemented. It also would have a strong positive influence on all the countries of the region. Then we go to, let's say, best scenarios. Best scenarios, I don't believe, and there is no reason to believe that Russia will be able to retake back even Kharkiv. Russia can take ruins, not cities. You have seen how they have taken Mariupol, and what happened with cities, they take over. They cannot take over cities, they can take over only ruins. After ruining and making this dead, they can do it. But there are other options. Your video mentioned issue of infrastructure. And what Russians are doing now, it's making Ukraine dysfunctional and broken. With all these attacks, and I'm afraid they are still underestimated. I'm afraid in 1 month we will be talking only about it. Because if you know how heating system in former Soviet Union was constructed, these attacks will not just make us having no lights. They might lead to real humanitarian disaster. Buildings, districts, cities, one moment, if Russians would make 2-3 attacks like they did last week, at one moment, heating will just not reach apartments. We had a horrible story of the city of Alchevsk. Those who follow Ukraine might remember when 2 weeks during the winter, the city didn't have heating. It was months and months of very difficult efforts for the whole of the country to save the city. To imagine Russians repeat 2-3 times attacks like now, we will have ghost cities. We will have cities which will people just abandon, and to repair it, it would need months and months of efforts. So it is a very bad scenario by which Russia can make Ukraine just broken and dysfunctional, despite they will not take over, but country will be very difficult to live, and who knows for how long it could last. Then we have some scenarios in the middle. In this last scenario, in this bad scenario, of course, it would show to countries of the Black Sea region that whatever they tell you, there is no organization which can save you. Neither OSCE nor UN can save you. You wanted EU? Well, you see, did EU help you? You wanted NATO? Did NATO help you? You look at Ukraine. It's frozen, it's broken. So it's the worst scenario from all of us. So something in between is not really much better than this best scenario. We have been discussing what kind of, in case if we stuck on the current front line, what kind of comparison can we make with Korea, West or West-East Germany, many examples. None of them is correct, but overall we can assume it could be a situation when none of the sides is strong enough to win and none of the sides is weak enough to lose. And it can last years and years and years with higher or lower intensity of fighting along this line. In this situation, the whole region will be a hostage. Just on one side, understanding on whose side sympathies they have, but on the other side, not being really able to influence, not being willing to engage, and just wait when it will be unlocked. And I wish it's unlocked tomorrow, but it can last decades. We have international examples. I wish it will not happen. So with these 3 scenarios, we can easily see the range, what should be done, and if possible, just very quickly, what should we do? You probably know very well all Ukrainian narrative now, more weapon, more sanctions. It's all is correct. But I think we have to get out of box and think a little bit more innovative about what can we all do to make first the best scenario happen. If you want, I can talk about it, or we can leave it for later part. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I don't know if it was an optimistic or a pessimistic or in the middle orientation or forecast, but thank you very much for clearly analyzing and putting before us what are the alternatives, at least alternative outcomes. Now, the second speaker is Leila Alieva. She's coming from Azerbaijan. She's working and living now in Oxford. But of course, she is very well informed about the development and the attitude in Azerbaijan. Maybe, Leila, you can a bit explain how is Azerbaijan, or how are you looking at the development or the possible outcome? Are the people afraid of a victory of Russia, that Russia will be in a stronger position to determine the development of the whole region? or what's your expectation or your fears or your hope concerning the development in Ukraine and the influence on the Black Sea region? Please.
Thank you so much. Does it work? Yes. Yeah. It's always difficult to speak in this context about Ukraine. Sorry. We feel it too personally. And because it wasn't anticipated, it's difficult to speak in the context of the war. As one of my compatriots said when the war started, from Azerbaijan, which is quite distant, he said, I had the feeling that the bombs were falling on my head. So there is a high level of sympathy, solidarity with Ukrainians. And it seems extremely surreal. This war is something nobody would understand. And that's what makes me coming to the roots. And the major threat and consequence I see is domination of hard power and military way of resolution of issues, whether they're domestic, they're regional or international. How did we come to that? Why deterrence didn't work? Why people were not prepared that there will be such a adventurous policy from the side of the biggest actor, who behaved quite differently in the early years. I would say that there was underestimation of small states and underestimation of Russian society in the perception of West. You probably remember in the 90s, the countries, 4 countries where the secessionist conflicts took place, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Ukraine and Moldova, created a defense security organization which was called Guam. It was quite a unique organization because it was not imposed by any great power like CSTO or CIS, but it was created from below. At some point, it was even viewed as the alternative to NATO membership, or a temporary arrangement which would delegate the security issue to this organization. I consider that the possible role of Guam was underestimated. And probably if this organization could have turned into a serious defense alliance, maybe we would have different developments now. The other thing is that there was also the military aggression against Ukraine. It's the sign of weakness of Russia, because Russia is not attractive anymore, if it ever was, but it's not even a source of modernization as it used to be, let's say, at some period of the 19th century, where Russia was undergoing certain liberal reforms. Russia is a source of the most reactive conservative trends. It is a threat. It is an aggressive and destructive power by now. But the problem is that Russia is weak in terms of soft power, while EU is the opposite. And today during our sessions, we discovered that all 3 Caucasus states, they have a very strong European identity. They were actually competing who is more European, which proves And actually Turkish also, the Turkish society seems to give preference, as our participants from Turkey and Greece, they confirmed that the Poles in Turkey also support this identity and attraction of the European Union or Europe to the states in terms of its soft power, normative power, values, and etc. So in this regard, of course, Black Sea region is an important region because it allows Europe to basically to help the states to realize their best reform potential. We can call it Europeanization, but in fact, it's democratization, it's the values of freedom, human rights, and just liberal ideas, which although now in decline in Europe, but still they're very important for identity in this region. So there are a few reasons why military power is dominating. It's not just about autocracy, because there are autocratic states which do not undertake aggression. They do not attack their neighbors. So they get along with the rules. Also, if you remember Jack Snyder's idea that democratizing states fight each other. So there is no such a direct dependence on the aggression or military way of expansion and autocratic rule. But there is something in the international relations which sends mixed messages to the autocrat, which basically help him to think that he can get away with the aggression. For instance, in all the secessionist conflicts, those who got the territorial gains, starting with Karabakh, then Georgian, Pridnestrovia, and Transnistria, and Ukraine, the idea was that the more you capture physically, the more you get as a result of negotiations. And actually that's what the Ukrainians are currently fighting against. That there will be no encouragement or legitimization of the military way of gaining the territory or control over territories or expansion. So this is the other level, which gives the sort of military a leading role in the current sort of geopolitical contest. However, I think, as you correctly said, we should go out of the box. And after atonement, after, hopefully, we'll come to Russian society, after the destructive forces, aggressive forces will be defeated, we will have to deal with Russia anyway. Russia is not gonna disappear. And I think the problem with Russia was a failure in transition, failure to make reforms and reframe the nation, or develop the positive distinct identity, the one which would be alternative to the power-based, personalized, hijacked identity which Putin was formulating. And this positive distinct identity, unfortunately, which was hijacked by Putin, you remember this duhovnist thing, and Putin put something else into this duhovnist concept. It was military religious concept, because it helped him to consolidate his power. So this failure to find this positive identity might be also one of the reasons why people were clinging to the official, they were supporting the war because there was no alternative identity, positive identity, which would help Russians to to define the added value in the international relations, in world culture and world relations. So I think one of the ways to restore and to help to restore Russia is to help it to reform and also to define this positive, distinct identity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Richard, Leila just mentioned the attractiveness or increased attractiveness of European Union for some of the countries. Now, on the economic field, do you see this attractiveness now? Will it be increasing instead of economic relationship with Russia? How do you see the whole field from the economic point of view?
I mean, the short answer to that is yes. I think that what we're seeing economically, geoeconomically here, is an acceleration of an existing trend rather than something fundamentally new. Of course, the war is fundamentally new. It's a brutal intensification of something which, in economic terms, was already happening. The decoupling of most of the European economy, including most of Central and Eastern Europe, including most of the Black Sea economies from Russia. And that started really in 2014. I mean, if you look at any standard indicator of trade integration, financial integration, investment integration, the change in the series is 2014. The annexation of Crimea, the exchange of sanctions. Almost all European countries trade, invest fundamentally less with Russia. It did in 2020 than they did in 2014. Now, this war, of course, intensifies that. It pushes that further, but it doesn't change the trend. The trend was already there. Anyway. If you look at Ukraine or if you look at Moldova, you see a very significant increase in trade and investment with the EU going back to 2014. Now, that's partly geopolitical. It's also about the DCFTAs and just this new form of integration from the EU side for this region, which has had very visible impacts. And you see Moldova, for example, it's as integrated with the EU already, even before this war started, as an EU member state. I mean, it's comparable with Bulgaria in terms of how much it trades, how much it invests with the EU. Even a country like Turkey, which is much bigger, has many more options. Also, in its case, you see this trend of decoupling from Russia since 2014, relatively. And the EU is the main, by far the main partner for Turkey as well, even before this started. I think because of this war, I mean, it is a massive thing and it accelerates this very, very much, as I said. We may end up with a level of economic integration between Central and Eastern Europe and Russia, even less than during the Cold War. And energy will be, I think, a very good example of that. I mean, there is this idea that some countries of the so-called middle powers can forge a middle way, and Turkey being an example of that. But I think that only applies in certain areas. I mean, an interesting development very recently was the decision of the Turkish state banks to withdraw from the Russian MIR payment system, which I think shows there are limits. Even a country like Turkey trying to navigate this middle way faces constraints. I think especially you see that in finance. I mean, the area where we still live in a unipolar world, basically, where the collective West is still completely dominant is in finance. This crisis has showed that the power of the dollar, the power of the US sanctions, the willingness or the unwillingness of countries to go against that. So I think maybe some middle powers have some way, but basically we're going to end up with a harder divide. And if it goes that way, this region will be particularly affected. I mean, it is on the fault line in a way. A lot of the Black Sea region is on the fault line of this, and we'll have to ultimately decide. And I think, of course, the politics is one thing. There are many political arguments we heard, interestingly, about the debate in Moldova today, but in an economic and a financial sense, the direction of travel, I think, is west, and I can see only more integration with Western Europe. I think, from Ukraine's perspective in particular, I mean, Ukraine now has a very central position in the next stage of European integration. It's hard to see how European integration, EU accession, the expansion of Euro-Atlantic institutions, east and south, can continue in the same way as in the past. I mean, Ukraine is just so much bigger, the challenges are so much different, the reconstruction needs are so huge. I think the whole process of EU accession, EU integration will change because of this, and probably in a good way, but it's not going to work the same way as in the past. But I think before we even get to that, there are two much more fundamental questions for Ukraine. One is the reconstruction itself and the extent to which that can start and how that can happen with the war continuing, you know, before there's some kind of durable peace or at least ceasefire, and as I understand, and I agree, that's still some way away. And I think the other issue for Ukraine in terms of European integration and economic development is the massive depopulation that it's facing and the risk that this becomes longer lasting, that people don't go back. And so I think that will also be a challenge in terms of the reconstruction, recovery of Ukraine. So I would say this is a huge event, also economically. It is a huge event, but it really pushes us further in a direction we were already going anyway. And if we come to this much harder divide, this new Cold War scenario, which I think is not unlikely, I foresee probably an even deeper Western integration, European integration of this region than we have now.
Thank you very much, Richard. I forgot to present you. Richard Grieveson is Deputy Director of the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. He's so well known already that I thought I need not to present him, but of course formally have to do it. And what I also want to do is that I want to welcome all those who are following our discussion in the social media, because it's live streamed, so welcome also for this debate. Now, the next speaker is Daria Isachenko. She is working at SVP, the German Institute for International Economic, what is it exactly? For German Institute for International and Security Affairs, a very well-known German institution, well-known across Europe and beyond. You spoke today on the panel concerning the gatekeepers to the Black Sea. We discussed the issue, of course, of just now the attractiveness of the European Union, the decreased attractiveness of Russia, and the increased attractiveness, or the increased role at least, of Turkey in the region. So how do you see the development of a possible new Black Sea region? Please, Daria.
Thank you very much. Well, I have 3 points to make. The first point is a problem, because I think the new Black Sea is likely to face the problems of the old Black Sea. And before this war, you had basically 3 key issues in the Black Sea that have been problematic. These are security, energy, and competing integration projects. And these competing integration projects are not only competing, but mutually exclusive. And you also have all these 3 key issues present in the Ukraine war. So I think the new Black Sea will struggle with the question how to deal with those issues. Second point is perhaps a good news, or on the way to good news, because I think we need to really discuss the role of Turkey here, and what the initiatives of Turkey since February and before, because the position, like the policy of Turkey has been that, like the approach that in the Black Sea, also in the wider Black Sea, if we include South Caucasus, that regional problems require regional solutions, this kind of idea of regional ownership. And I would place those initiatives of Ankara towards Ukraine also under this scheme of regional ownership. So we had the peace talks in Istanbul in March, which was actually a momentum for this, where you have exchange of prisoners of war, and you also have these Black Sea grain initiatives that Turkey, it was conducted with the United Nations, with the engagement of Turkey, but I think Turkey has played there a very active role, and also has been calling for this a month or a couple of months before it have been implemented. So the question to ask whether perhaps you do need regional actors, the engagement, because I also think that we do have a lot to learn from this triangle of how this relationship works between Turkey, Ukraine, and Russia. And I think it's particularly what I found interesting is policy of Ukraine towards Turkey, despite partnership between Ankara and Moscow. And I think here, what we can learn, it's really a question of price. What price are you ready to pay, and what you get in exchange? So this triangle still needs careful analysis. And the third point, I also think that new Black Sea requires realistic approach. And for this realistic approach, we need, I would suggest we need to distinguish two things. First, we need to distinguish between spheres of influence versus spheres of interests. And the second difference we need to address whether we talk about conflict resolution or conflict management, because these are two different things. So when we talk about spheres of influence and spheres of interests, when we talk about Turkey, Russia, we always talk about their spheres of influence and how they compete. But when you look about on the level of their interests, they're not necessarily opposed in the Black Sea. For example, what brings them together is the idea that they want they want to keep everybody else out. But this is not only the point. We can talk about like Russia's influence is decreasing or increasing, but I also think it's important how Russia views its own interests, because they define their policy. Of course, this is basically the struggle for domination, but if they define their policy in terms of interests, and then if they see the interests at stake, then there will be a reaction towards this. So decrease of influence does not mean inactive Russia, and I think this needs to be taken into account, and the same also goes for Turkey. So my point here is that you cannot ignore, when you talk about the new Black Sea, you cannot ignore Turkey and Russia. And also when we talk about interest, we also need to ask, because the Black Sea, also the wider Black Sea, these two regions have seen various degrees of engagement by Western actors, and I also think this needs to be borne in mind about the priorities of the West in this region. And also this realistic approach that also needs kind of examination between conflict resolution or conflict management, because if you cannot solve the conflicts, then at least you need to somehow manage them. So I think this is what also we learned from engagement of Turkey in this war. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Now I would like to go the following way, that Vasyl, I would ask you to elaborate a bit on what has to be done, and then we go for the general discussion. I would also ask the colleagues who are here from the seminar, and if they want to contribute some ideas, some corrections, some counterpoint, whatever. But perhaps, Vasyl, you can a bit explain what you think should be done now in this very critical situation.
I think it's one of rules not only to say who is responsible, but also to give an answer what to do. You probably heard about Ukraine's president address to G19 nations with proposal what should be done, and armament and sanctions are all right things to do. But we have to think a little bit more out of box. What else can be done, or what can be done differently to respond problems which might come tomorrow, today, or to prevent them to happen. And when I was thinking for myself what kind of list of actions I would propose to decision makers, Again, where is the key problem and where is the best solution? Inside of Russia. So Russia has been consistently, as they do not have other instruments, creating problems for us. They attacked Ukraine, we have no problems inside of Ukraine. They attacked Georgia, and you have two conflicts on the territory of Georgia. They support in Moldova self-proclaimed separatist region of Transnistria. They interfere in US elections. They support left radicals, right in your countries, not because they like very much rightist or leftist agenda, but just to create problems which help to destabilize, which helps them, if you cannot be better, you make your counterpart, whom you want to challenge, worse, just to become equal. So it's what Russians have been doing at least for last 10 years or maybe even more. What West is not doing, it's forcing Russia to deal not with Western problems, but with Russian problems. So I think the focus should be now changed. I do not understand why there is no such kind of strong efforts as it was at the end of Cold War to support opposition forces inside of Russia. There are so many different groups of influence in Russia. Probably none of them is type of angels, but if there is stronger internal competitions inside of Russia, it would certainly decrease willingness of Putin to interfere into internal affairs of other countries. I think the West, all of us, we have to be interested into splitting Russian oligarchs into making them very clear choice. If you are against Putin, you have option to be out of sanctions. We recently analyzed Western sanction policy. We took 100 top Russian businessmen. Some of them are in armament business, some of them are directly linked with Putin, and it's only 26% of them are in sanctions. Moreover, out of these 26, not all of them are in EU, UK, Ukraine, US sanctions. There are some which are present in one sanction, some in not sanctions, and the most important, there is no clarity for Russian oligarchs what you have to do not to be in sanctions. I think that message should be very clear. All 100 richest Russian, maybe even 1,000 richest Russian, they all get to sanctions lists until they condemn Putin policy and they support Ukraine. Very simple decision. You have so many Russian oligarchs still living on the territory of EU, and they are not in, like famous Rybolovlev in Monaco, who is directly linked with Putin regime and whose participation in different operations has been proved by so many articles and investigations. You have so many Russian oligarchs who are still living in EU, but they are not in sanctions. Some of them are friends with some aristocrats, some political parties, some of them invest in sport or other activities. To make on one side, sanctions should punish, on the other side, they should encourage. They should see that they might be out of sanctions, but only if they condemn Putin, if they support opposition inside of Russia, if they support Ukraine in this case. So I think there must be a very focused policy from Western sides, from Western countries, official or unofficial, to support regime change in Russia. My personal perception is that regime change in Russia is a kind of taboo. Whenever I personally try to speak about it in different forums, US, UK partners all say, no, stop here. It's too far. No, it's not too far. It's the easiest way to help this horror to finish. It's the easiest way to stop war in Ukraine, to finish war in Ukraine. Other things, the war was unthinkable. I was always very hesitant about Ukraine's NATO aspiration. I fully shared views of our German or French counterparts who always said, well, your accession to NATO means war with Russia. Well, Russians were very clear with their message, if you join NATO, we open the war. But they opened war without Ukraine joining NATO. The worst happened. The worst happened. So NATO accession can now be rethought in a very different way. And here I would say that I see from the side of Germany and France and some other Eastern countries some progress, and at least they started now to understand that as war happened, nothing worse can happen. NATO can be now not a problem, but a solution for Ukraine. And again, if you think about possible type of settlement at a certain moment, having in mind how deep is distrust between Ukraine and Russia, without engagement of someone else, it will be impossible to ensure peace. Even ceasefire would be impossible. Look at Korea. Ceasefire is there, yes, it's violated, but it only was possible because there is UN peacekeeping force. Look at other similar cases. Germany, East-West. There were some difficult moments, but still it was one bloc on one side, one bloc on the other side. Look what happened when a missile, we don't know which missile, some say it's Ukrainian, I personally believe it's Russian, but doesn't matter now. What happened when this missile hit Polish territory? How immediately things became serious, because everyone understood now it's Article 5, it's NATO-Russia conflict in which Russia has very little chances, but which is Third World War. No, it's too far. We step one step back. So if NATO has to be rethought, if NATO role in Ukraine should be reimagined, I think it can be a guarantor for everyone. Even for Russia, it would be beneficial if Ukraine is today in NATO with certain obligations. So I think it's a very good field of thinking how we can get out of this nightmare, at least with not win-win, but with not even more going into lose-lose. The third new idea, which I have been promoting in the last one, I can produce more, but it's interesting. People are very careful about word of genocide. I have here exact quote for international treaties. What is genocide? Genocide when there is a policy of a state to kill or undermine people on their ethnic national belonging. When Russians started this war, they were pretending they were going to liberate us from our government. They all learned, we may dislike our government, but it's not their business to decide us what we do with our government. And now you see this social data that 90% of Ukrainians support President Zelensky. It's not because we like President Zelensky, we love him. No, it's our president. We will change him maybe next day after war is over, but we will not allow Russians to change our president. So they cannot, they understood very easily that with this narrative, they cannot really continue this war. And what I have been witnessing, and probably all of you who follow Russia have noticed this, it's getting more and more attack on Ukraine and Ukrainians. Have you seen this famous meeting of Putin with mothers, soldier mothers, so-called, when he was listening to them and sharing their grievances for Russian soldiers who killed in Ukraine? One of mothers in his presence said, "My son died because he stood up and said, 'Guys, let's kill these Ukrainians.'" It's genocide. What they are doing with their airstrikes on our infrastructure, they are not really fighting a conventional war. They are not attacking military objects. They are killing cities. We will have in 1 month, if one or more attacks repeat, we will have dead cities. It's direct attack on civil infrastructure and population. It's genocide. I think it's time now to start working to declare Russian war and Russia as a country which is making genocide towards Ukrainians with all the subsequent decisions. As a country which is now doing genocide, they may not be in OSCE, they may not be in UN, they should be punished according to international law for doing something like genocide. Of course, this idea, when you say it to different audiences, reaction is different, but it's not non-starter now. And I'm afraid in 1 month, in case if they repeat 1 or 2 attacks like they did last week, it would become already something obvious. So ideas like that should be at least analyzed.
Okay, thank you. Very strong pleas and strong words, especially on the second and the third point. But they are on the table, and I open the floor. Whoever wants to raise an issue, we have a colleague here. We have to leave a microphone.
Yeah, Günther Fehlinger from the Austrian Committee for NATO Accession. I would like to ask about the NATO question and about Ukraine, because it was very meaningful what you said about the German membership as a divided country in 1955. My question is now, would you be ready to accept NATO membership if NATO supports you then to liberate the territories, Mariupol, which was occupied in 2022, but still as a divided country? Because it's a very painful choice to do for a country. It was very painful for Mr. Adenauer to accept, basically to sacrifice the idea of unity for NATO membership. Would Mr. Zelensky be ready to do that?
Any other question for the moment? Yeah, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, for Vasyl, I don't ask because I fully share what he said, but I had a question to Leila. Thank you for your talks and ideas. You said that I understand that outsiders should think and help think for developing positive agenda for Russia, basically. But my understanding that it's very hard to impose any positive agenda. It has to somehow grow up in Russia. And do you see chances? Because even with opposition, I like the idea that the West has to somehow divide Russia and support opposition. I'm not very much sure how realistic it is. For me, maybe some national divisions. More I like the idea about oligarchs, that I trust a bit more than just supporting the opposition, but about the positive agenda. Who, when, and in what time span?
Yes. Any other question, or we just continue with the debate? Leila, perhaps you start. Of course, please. Dennis.
Yeah, thank you very much for continuing the conversation about the Russian aggression against Ukraine. I was wondering, in continuation of what Vasyl was saying, we have already the example of Russia being acknowledged as a state or a regime that is supporting terrorist acts. And I didn't see any kind of repercussion from the decisions which were made by the Assembly of the Council of Europe, by the European Parliament, by the delegations of the parliaments of the NATO member states. So do you think that acknowledging that Russia is committing genocide against the Ukrainian population will do more than already something which is substantial and doesn't really give any perspective about serious additional sanctions maybe against Russia and against Russian decision makers and, of course, oligarchs? Thank you.
Thank you. Just to inform, Dennis comes from Moldova and Veronica comes from Ukraine. Just to a bit explain, and maybe you present yourself also. Yes, please.
Yeah, should I introduce myself? All right, my name is Jeff Manners. I'm a retired insurance executive. However, even though I had worked in insurance, my interest has always been in Central and Eastern Europe. I've worked in this part of the world for over 40 years, even before the changes in 1989. So I maintain a strong academic and personal interest in this part of the world. My question concerns some other countries, such as India and China, who do give some support or moral support and possibly economic and physical support to Russia. What can be undertaken to isolate Russia further? What steps can we take? Because I'm sure if they lose the support of, one hears about, there's a good part of the world in Africa, I don't know what Latin America's position is on this, like Brazil, but definitely India and China have maybe wagged their tongue and finger a little bit at Mr. Putin, but they haven't really done much more than that, nor has Saudi Arabia, as far as I know.
Well, they have some common economic interests, especially concerning the oil. Any other question, or maybe we start to Leila?
Thank you for the question. That's indeed a very, it's $100 million question. This positive, distinct identity, it consists of two parts. First is, of course, it is the result of internal domestic work. If you follow what was happening in the Russian society, there were difficulties with this formulation of this identity. Most of the Russians ended up in a very pessimistic, watching, of course, the failure of reforms. They watched this war, so they tried to find the sources of all this ugly reality as far as 12th century, sometimes, putting all the blame on the Mongols, sometimes, to the others, even older period. So this pessimism was quite natural, but there is another part of it that you can always find some positive pages in your history which might lay the basis of your positive identity. Such, for instance, was, as I already mentioned, 19th century Alexander II reforms. Interestingly enough, that Putin would base this identity, which he hijacked, formal identity, on the remembrance of the Alexander I and Alexander III, by putting the statues to all those, but never to Alexander II. And that's also a very interesting phenomenon. We published a book, by the way, the effects which reforms of Alexander II had on the oil boom in Azerbaijan. And, I can refer you to that book. And so if you, for instance, some Russians were trying to base the opposition movement of the memories of the Novgorod Republic, which is, I think, disputed by Ukrainians. They say that it's part of our history. But still, even if it's shared history, that's also the period of liberal and sort of roots of some democratic self-rule and things like that. So you can always find something. The second part of this positive identity is the added value or branding, which develops in the interaction with external actors. It's not the isolated process. It's the external actors give you orientation of what is valued or what they consider to be the added value, and what can be your unique contribution, positive from the point of view of international world civilization and the most progressive values. This process apparently was not very clear either to the society or to even some elites. And that failed also because for instance, the elite thought that quite cynical. I mean, post-Soviet elites are very cynical. They consider that the value conversations is blah, blah, blah. There is no such a thing. There is a realpolitik. The West is all about realpolitics, interest, influence, but nothing about values. So this is one of the problems which we're facing. And you were speaking about, indeed, first, after this war, and I hope it will finish very quickly, it's my hope. I don't know whether it will, but hope it will finish quickly by the defeat of the regime, which would definitely include de-Putinization, de-Stalinization, and other processes. Yeah, and democratization, let's say so. So atonement together with the reforms and liberalization of the Russian society might drag along, and there are different opinions about that, from 10 years to 100 years. So it depends whether you're optimistic or pessimistic in this regard. If you look at the state of society, I view the society as mainly post-Soviet opportunistic society, which very much depends on the external actors, on the domestic sort of change of power. So I don't think there are very deep ideologies ingrained in post-Soviet Russia. I think it's rather opportunistic, and it might not take too long time after the regime is defeated, after the country is defeated in this war, after atonement goes through and things like that. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Vasyl, what do you
Thank you very much.
say about the critical
I will start
remarks?
from the easiest question about state-sponsored of terrorism or genocide resolutions, what it would do. Well, first of all, institutions which you mentioned have no direct competence in these areas. They might adopt any resolution. It has no influence on real policies of their states. European Parliament has no influence on EU member states' policy in this area. If it was European Council which adopted a decision to declare Russia state sponsoring terrorism, it would be absolutely different issue. If UN General Assembly, acting according to resolution United for Peace, declared Russia as a state responsible for genocide of Ukrainians, sometimes you explain students on international relations that it's like playing chess or cards. Some people have different preferences. It's like queen in chess. And it's not just because you want to make this resolution, just because another side, before making yet another attack on our infrastructure, should be aware. If they do once more, unfortunately, our American friends will not destroy Russian fleet in Black Sea. Unfortunately, they will not attack Kremlin with nuclear arms. Unfortunately, they cannot. I wish they could, but they cannot, okay? We have to take it as reality. But if they know, if they make one more attack, then all these guys will organize voting in UNGA declaring Russia state responsible for genocide. And then international court should be created to make judgment on Putin. Oh, they will think 3 times before attacking. So it's a serious card you put on the table. It's a serious card. So as a foreign minister of Ukraine, you had to think about cards which you have to have in your hands. And it's a serious card. But of course, if it is just NATO Parliamentary Assembly declaring Russia even Putin son of evil or Russia, I don't know what, it has no influence even on NATO. Because it's just a Parliamentary Assembly of NATO, that's all. They have no direct executive powers, they have no authority over issues they declared, they discussed, they adopted something. So I'm pretty sure if institutions in charge of issues like state terrorism or genocide considered this, even not adopted, but even considered, it would be already a serious step preventing Russia from making these horrible attacks on Ukraine. So I would not underestimate it, both in terms of substance and in terms of game. You have to accept it's games. They are playing with Americans, beating Ukraine and sending messages to Americans, and sometimes you are not sure to what extent Americans are ready to respond, not only with arm deliveries, but also with other actions to stop horrible attacks like we had last week. More difficult question about NATO. I am not President Zelensky, and I do not represent him. Among Ukrainians, we have unspoken agreement. I think I've not seen anyone who would disagree with this, that before the end of the war, we support our president, full stop. If he says no, we says no. If he declared recently no negotiations until we take over Crimea. So I repeat what he said, and I fully agree. So as Ukrainian, probably I will have to tell you no. As an expert in foreign affairs, imagine I'm not Ukrainian. Certainly, I would consider this option as one of realistic. Just imagine future in case if we successfully liberated Kherson region and came to Crimean Peninsula, and Russia has not yet collapsed, and coup d'etat didn't take place, and Putin is still in Kremlin with his red button on nuclear missiles. Well, you have to think a number of times how to deal with this, and here what you said is exactly one of options. And actually, during this summer, there were a number of initiatives, one of them including former NATO Secretary General Rasmussen, and they actually mentioned this, that accession of Ukraine to NATO and NATO guarantees to territories which are under control of Ukrainian government, it's absolutely valid option. It's not me, it's Rasmussen. And I would consider this as much better option than continuing this bloody war every day in my country. Of course, no one ever will recognize Russian, as I think in many similar cases, no one ever will recognize Russian annexation, illegal annexation of any meter of our territory. But if at certain moment we are in deadlock and we see it would take decades, well, this issue should be on the table and should be discussed. Whether President Zelensky will accept it or not, I don't really know.
Okay, thank you. Richard, may I ask you perhaps on this issue of Russia and the possibility of the regime change, the economic consequences of the sanctions and the whole withdrawal of companies, European, Western companies from Russia, in the short run didn't have much success, much influence, but you mentioned also that in the longer term, the economic situation will deteriorate very much. Do you think this can contribute to a change of the regime, or how do you see the economic effects of the sanctions and the whole economic situation on Russian mid or long-term development?
I mean, I wouldn't agree that the sanctions had no effect. I think they had less effect than many people hoped and expected at the start. I mean, the estimations right at the start were for a contraction of Russian GDP of 15% this year, and it will probably be about 3%, so about a fifth of that. It has had an effect, though. I mean, it's very different if you go across the economy. I mean, the car sector has been more or less wiped out, for example. I mean, there are areas of the economy which have suffered very much, but there has been a certain resilience there. And I think to an extent, we probably should have expected that. I mean, if you look at everything they did since 2014, they were prepared for this. You know, they reduced very much the external vulnerabilities of the economy. They reduced the ways by which sanctions could target them. The one thing they, of course, didn't count on is the freezing of foreign assets. But that seems to have been a decision that was taken more or less 1 or 2 days before, kind of an emotional reaction, an understandable emotional reaction of the West to freeze the foreign assets. But otherwise, I think they were prepared for what came. What we're seeing now, though, is a slow burn economic crisis in Russia. I mean, I think that's for sure. we're seeing a partial deindustrialization, basically, of the economy. They don't have access to the parts that they need for industry on the scale they need them. They get some of it via Turkey, via China, as you said, but they definitely don't get everything that they need, and as things break, they cannot replace everything. And so they will, in a way, in the manufacturing, the industrial sector, they will, over time, if this continues, basically go back a stage of economic development. And this stagnation, which has anyway been the story of the Russian economy for a decade. I mean, it hasn't really grown since 2014, maybe 1% a year. Best case for them is a continuation of that, and probably not even that. So I think the economic future is bleak. The economic future is basically a subservient junior partner of China, supplying cheap energy to China. I mean, I think this idea of sort of big North Korea is unrealistic. I mean, it won't be that kind of isolation from the global economy because of the relationship with China and other countries, but it is a very bleak economic future. It is stagnation at best. Now, I'm not a political scientist. I don't know at which point the political impacts of that kick in, but it's hard to imagine it won't have any impact. And I mean, if you look at what's happening right now, I mean, there's a huge brain drain. I mean, really very significant. We heard in the video about the number of people arriving in Armenia. It's happening in Georgia. It's happening in Serbia. It's happening in Turkey. I mean, this is very significant. You have a lot of people going to the army, a lot of people leaving the country, in a country which already had a huge problem with labor anyway. And so the economic outlook is really bleak. On China and India, because this was an interesting question also from an economic point of view, I mean, they'll keep buying the energy, I think. I mean, they've got, in that sense, the Russians right where they want them. It's a cheap supplier of energy for them. I think the way to influence their behavior, if we want to do that, is really in the financial sector, as I mentioned. I mean, I think what this crisis has shown and the response has shown, where we, the collective West, are still absolutely dominant, is in finance. And the power of the dollar. I mean, I've been reading my whole career about the end of the dollar. It never happens, you know? I mean, the dollar is still there. The dollar, and you see, even the Chinese, but also Turkey and other countries, there are certain things that they won't do with the Russians to help the Russians. And that's because of the fear of US sanctions. And when you get to a certain level in the global trading system, in global commerce, you cannot deal without the dollar in the US banking sector. And that is where I think the real power is, and that makes, I think, the oligarch sanctioning scenario fairly realistic as well. And the final point, I think, on the Chinese, I mean, they have very serious economic difficulties of their own now. You know, their growth model has blown up, basically. I heard a very convincing presentation last week that their long-term growth potential is about 1% a year. I think it's probably higher, but it's not going to be 7 to 10 or whatever they've had in the past. And they are obviously very worried about their political consequences of that. And Putin has taken a decision which has had a material negative impact on the global economy and therefore on the Chinese economy, and will continue to. And it's hard to imagine that behind the scenes there isn't a conversation already happening and pressure already coming also from the Chinese side on Putin for that reason, because of what their political worries out of this.
Thank you. Daria, Vasyl said quite rightly, there is strong resistance on speaking about regime change in Russia or any other country, but especially now Russia. Maybe out of two reasons. The one was we shouldn't do that, we shouldn't go into that field, we don't know what happens. And the second reason is there are not people you can trust and would be better. Where came the argument, well, with Putin we know who he is, we didn't really know, but we never know what comes after him. What's your attitude? Should it be this in the focus of our new Black Sea region to say we have to change the regime in Russia, otherwise it is not possible to have peace in Ukraine or peace and stability and prosperity in the Black Sea? Is regime change something where the West should be engaging in?
That's a difficult question. As a Turkey expert, I say regime change perhaps is not a good idea, but I think it all depends. Basically, your policy depends on how you view the causes of this war, right? If you say that Putin is the problem, then the answer is then regime change. But then you also, I think what this war, this unexpectedness also tells us that we, talking about new Black Sea region, I think the task is really to come up with alternatives, like these scenarios and what ifs question, right? So what if? So I think this is a question that requires a really serious and fundamental deliberation. Because what I notice, and now I speak as a researcher from the German think tank, but also following events in Russia in the discussion, what I see on both sides is there is this fundamental self-reflection. In Germany, for example, very strong kind of reaction in the sense of what went wrong and how we deal with it because of this, like the policy of Germany kind of did not bring the expected results. But also in Russia, you see this fundamental questioning of relations with the West, right? So it's not only some, for example, not only question the last 30 years, what went wrong since the end of the East-West conflict, but also say, well, we actually, since the Peter the Great, it all went wrong, this orientation towards Europe. And this, I think this fundamental discussion shows just how, like the fundamental moment, I would not say this word Zeitenwende here. I think you've all heard this enough. But I think it does, I mean, you have to really, like, it's, I mean, you really have to think about the alternatives, but you also have to think about what went wrong. Because I think this, your assessment of what went wrong also will influence your future, but for the future, I really insist on this what ifs. Yeah. I don't know if I answered, but I tried.
Well, I see that the difficulty, of course, to answer to this question, because I would say there is no black and white, and there is no easy answer anyway to it. And we don't know how Turkey would react. We don't know how China would react. If that would not bring, you know, some of the countries even closer to Russia when they say, look, the West is thinking about regime change. The next time maybe it's us in China or it's us in Turkey who will be victim of that regime change policy. But anyway, is there any urgent question? Yes, we have two. Alexander first, and then the lady, and then we will try to close the meeting. Alexander, please. Alexander is coming from Armenia.
Thank you. My question is to Vasyl and Leila. How do you know that after regime change, the leader of Russia will be Mother Teresa? How do you know that it will be better than now? Do you really think that it is so personalized and Putin is a reason of Russian political culture, not result of Russian political culture? What is an indicator how you can predict what's going to be in Russia when you push on oligarchs and then will change regime because they will not be happy with the old one? That's my question.
It's a very clear question. Yes, thank you. Please.
Thank you. I would like to concentrate my question on the two possible solutions or suggestions in which way the solutions would go from the lady who talked last and the gentleman. You talked about the problem as basis for the solution, which was that Putin didn't want NATO with nuclear weapons at his front door. And even on the eve before the attack, he talked, and it was denied that it is possible to talk about a bloc-free or neutral Ukraine. If you say that NATO could be part of the solution, guaranteeing the security of Ukraine without, if I understood right, I don't know, without Ukraine being actually official full member of NATO, this certainly would help a lot, because this was always the saying before the war. But how would you get the United States, and there was no talk about the United States in this matter, to agree with this? If you remember the famous negotiations in Istanbul, where it was said, or in the media at least, that two sides already were very close to an agreement. Next day, Biden called, and the British Prime Minister even flew immediately to Kyiv and said, no, we are not done yet, which means that there is a certain goal the United States had set in this matter. And Pretorius also is quoted as saying, we want to install a military base at the Black Sea. So, and if we remember the laws in the United States, it's called Act, they created in 2017 and 2019, 17 to cut off the energy supply from Russia to Western Europe, and in 19 to make sure that Nord Stream will never go into production, which they achieved both goals. They already achieved. We always have to ask cui bono in every matter of actions. How will you get the United States to agree to these goals and to help to make peace? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have one more last question for the lady, or two questions, okay. Yeah, we have then to close. But please be very brief, only a brief question, because we are late already.
The question is, given Turkey's deliberate dichotomy vis-à-vis Russia and being a NATO state, could Turkey, equipping you with unmanned drones, could Turkey finally be a sort of spokesman for Ukraine getting into NATO? Or could finally, at the end of the day, the Black Sea become NATO's lake?
Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, briefly. No. Well, yes. Yeah, give it. But please, a short question. Yeah, I know, but a short question only.
Yeah, so for me it's very short. I'm a Romanian. I was young when we had the revolution against Ceausescu. I heard all the opinion, so I'm also part of the Black region. My question is, because I saw many documentary, why wouldn't be possible in Russia to stop this regime, because they still had lots of opponents. The last one was poisoned and so many others. They tried to oppose Putin regime, who in my opinion is a dictator. Why, with all these sanctions, and also lately I saw on Arte there are more than 300 young people who left the country against the mobilization from Putin in September. Why is no possibility that there's an internal revolution in Russia against the regime?
Thank you. The last question, the neighbor. This is the end.
My name is Erwin Seim. I've been working much with the conflicts in the Western Balkans in the 90s and following Ukraine now. I'm a bit allergic to inflation with the use of the term genocide. Genocide has a legal foundation very clearly. Well, it's been discussed academically back and forth, but I here see the use of genocide as a very clear politicized manner and as a political strategy. And I've seen how that has complicated post-war reconstruction on the Balkans, and I'm afraid it's not the best strategy for
thank you.
Ukraine. But that's a comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, very brief answers, and the rest can be discussed at the reception, because we have to close also the reception at 10 o'clock, but it's always now, please, a brief answer.
I will try to answer all these questions. They are so serious and so interesting that reception is gone. Regime change, it's now the whole theory. We don't know who will be after Putin. It is not important. Moment of change is already for our army a huge potential for liberating of territories without losses. Even from this point of view, it's already worthwhile of thinking, at least from Ukrainian perspective, it's the best moment to advance. Second, the whole structure of current Russian political system is based on Putin. As someone told, Putin is not a man, is function. All first, second, third levels of Russian power, they are all linked to Russia. There are many towers of Kremlin who hate each other and who would kill, eat, divide on pieces each other if there was no Putin. So any successor of Putin will not be the same key central element which is keeping the whole Russian power united as it is now. Whoever comes after him, this clown Medvedev, whoever, the system will either fall down as card house, or the system will fall into internal clashes, which again will weaken Russia and give us more space for advance of our army. I can give you maybe 20 more arguments that regime change in Russia, at least for us, for our army, is beneficial. It's a chance to move ahead. Yes, of course, every game is very risky. If you have Prigozhin tomorrow, a president of Russia, he would be more risky, or Kadyrov. Well, I don't believe Kadyrov will ever be president of Russia, I'm sorry, even with all the fantasies we can imagine. But in any case, being even more aventuristic than Putin, they would immediately cause internal disagreement and attacks from other groups. Russia would sink into something where Ukraine will just disappear from their agenda, and it's what we need. Yes, it's risky, I agree. But if you, again, make analysis of cost benefits, as for me, it's the quickest, the least painful end of this war. And we can have 2 hours discussion about it, I am pretty sure. On NATO, it's also an issue of analysis of your strategy according to your goals. If you come at a certain moment to a scenario, let's imagine deadlock. We don't trust them, they don't trust us. Even if we agreed to stop shooting at each other, number of people killed, personal wounds, hatred is so high that even tomorrow Zelensky said, soldiers stop shooting, I'm not quite sure that they would all follow his order. People who lost their families, their houses. So there must be another element of the game which would ensure both sides it's over and there is a guarantor which can calm down. So in this case, NATO is not anymore a trigger to war as it was perceived by Russians some years ago. It can be for Russians a guarantor from renewal of war. So NATO is now absolutely, I was strong proponent, and there are people who can confirm this, of neutrality of Ukraine. I was always for neutral status, exactly because it was very clear if you join NATO, Russia will start war. But they started, full stop, it's over. We have nothing to lose. We have nothing to lose. So NATO has huge positive potential now for Ukraine. In terms of both strategy and tactics, it's probably one of very few instruments which can guarantee peace for Russia as well. Turkey, we had today in the morning a very good discussion about Turkey, and yes, they are in a very unique situation. No any country can be in such a situation now, and yes, it's now a kind of envoy Well, it's envoy from both sides. They're so unique that they can speak openly with both presidents. And if there is a new agreement, I'm pretty sure it will be in Istanbul, and it will be somehow moderated and agreed by a Turkish president or Turkish authority. For the moment, they're not so successful, but their potential is probably the biggest and the strongest compared to all the other players.
Leila, thank you.
I think there was one question from Alexander regarding why do I think that Russian society can change, right? I don't think there is something unique about Russia's situation. The history has seen the autocrats and dictators who were aggressors at the same time. I mean, Germany, Franco regime, others. It's very difficult now. It's a philosophical question. Who is to blame, the society or, the dictator? I think it's probably somehow they're interacting, influencing each other. But nothing is terminal. I mean, look at Germany now. Look at Spain. Look in different. Of course, there is there are differences in history. There is a sort of experience of liberalism in European states, unlike in Russia and things like that. But there is nothing. I don't believe that there is nothing in any social group which cannot be positively developed once the freedoms are provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, you want any comment?
Maybe a brief comment on Turkey. Just we've discussed it a lot, but not so much the economics. So I agree fully. I mean, it is the clear mediator. It's the only viable mediator in this. That's clear. But I think in general, there's a real danger geopolitically, geoeconomically of overreach, because I think they're very ambitious about what they want to do, including in the Black Sea region, and they don't have the economy to back it up. Basically, the economy is full of holes. It's very vulnerable to external shocks. It's very vulnerable to US sanctions. This idea of a true middle power which can sort of navigate this new Cold War and pursue its own path. In the end, if they step too far away from what the Americans want, the Americans have the tools to stop it. And so I think no arguments on the mediator role in this conflict, but some of Turkey's broader ambitions are not consistent with its economic reality, I would say.
Daria?
Perhaps quickly to the question of the possibility of solution, was it right? Yours question?
Which question?
My question was about the United States. How will you convince them to help to make peace? This was my question.
Let's go have some dinner.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presence here, for your participation. Especially thank you for the panel, of course. And I think it was a very interesting discussion with some new ideas and some new contributions how to solve the issue. And maybe some, as you said, you changed some of your attitudes because of the war. And I think many of us changed and had to change our attitudes, our opinions because of the war, the dreadful war. But together with Leila, we hope at least that the war will stop very soon. And with that, this event has been closed, and we invite you in the neighboring rooms for a small reception for about 1 hour. Please understand that organization-wise, it has to be closed in 1 hour, but please enjoy it, and maybe you address some of the questions to our speakers or amidst yourself. Thank you very much for coming and for the debate.